Revolutionary greetings, comrades. Thank you for joining. Thank you for joining Black Alliance for Peace's webinar, Countering Colonial Policing in U.S. Domestic Colonies. My name is Michael Alexander, and I'm a member of Black Alliance for Peace, or BAP, and I'm a part of the research and political education team. So the Black Alliance for Peace seeks to recapture and redevelop the historic anti-war, anti-imperialist, and pro-peace positions of the radical Black movement through educational activities, as we are here now, organizing and movement support. Organizations and individuals in the Alliance will work to oppose both militarized domestic state repression and the policies of destabilization, subversion, and the permanent war agenda of the US state globally. And as far as my being a part of the BAP's research and political education team, we create political education materials that inform the public and our membership on how militarism, global and domestic, are connected with the repression of African Black people everywhere. So before we get into a little more, wanted to remind everyone to turn off your cameras and mute so there aren't any mistakes as far as with the recording and for discussion. Now, a little housekeeping. So for tonight, we have 5 incredible panelists, which will share their analyses on the manifold ways US police forces terrorize African Black people and oppressed communities in US domestic colonies, as well as strategies for organizing against this brutality. So as I said, please mute and turn off your cameras. And also for tonight's format, our panelists will share their analyses, and we will then join our first breakout room following those panelist discussions. And you will join a breakout room according to the number next to the panelists that you would like to join. We will reconvene back here in the main room. And then again, we will break out into a second breakout room according to the number that you add to your Zoom name that corresponds to the panelists' room. So we'll go back over that again, and with each of the panelists' shared discussions. So with that, I'd like to introduce our panelists. So for our first panelist is Coco. And Coco is a class-conscious New African citizen worker supporting the provisional government of the Republic of New Africa, PJRNA. Also, Coco is an organizer with the Community Movement Builders and with the Black Alliance for Peace. They are a self-sustaining working mother who spends their time in service to the liberation of African people. Their goal is to confront contemporary contradictions from a revolutionary New African nationalist and Pan-African perspective, working in struggle to free political prisoners towards self-determination, land, and independence. Our second panelist is Arlene Eisen, and inspired by the Black and Vietnamese liberation movements, Arlene Eisen has been a militant in the struggle against imperialism since the 1960s. She edited the movement newspaper, was a leading voice in the anti-imperialist women's movement of the 1970s, and the author of Women of Vietnam, which sold 50,000 copies and was translated into 4 languages. She worked as a sociology and women's studies lecturer, machinist, journalist, and public health expert. After Katrina, she retired from her day jobs and worked under the leadership of MXGM, or Malcolm X Grassroots Movement, in People's Hurricane Relief in New Orleans. Impelled by the outrage surrounding the murder of Trayvon Martin, she wrote Operation Ghetto Storm, initially published by MXGM. More recently, she taught US political economy at the University of Havana and was a staff writer for Venezuela Analysis based in Caracas. And for nearly 3 years, she produced and hosted a monthly radio show, Nina Viva, on KPOO-FM, San Francisco, that featured voices of women in struggle against empire. Her proudest contribution to the struggle has been raising her 2 sons, Tongo and Biko, from whom she continues to learn. And for Tongo, originally from San Francisco, Tongo Eisen-Martin is a poet, movement worker, and educator. His latest curriculum on extrajudicial killings of Black people, We Charge Genocide Again, has been used as an educational and organizing tool throughout the country. His book titled Someone's Dead Already was nominated for a California Bookstore Award. His book, Heaven is All Goodbyes, was published by the City Lights Pocket Poets series, was shortlisted for the Griffin's Poetry Prize, and won a California Book Award and an American Book Award. His latest book, Blood on the Fog, was released in the fall in the City Lights Pocket Poets series and named one of the New York Times Poetry Books of the Year. In 2020, he co-founded Black Freighter Press to publish revolutionary works. He is San Francisco's 8th Poet Laureate. And if you would like to join these rooms, they are corresponding to the numbers that are in the list. So for Tongo, you would add 3 to the beginning of your Zoom room name. Dana Alserjani Abu Shanab is a first-generation daughter of exiled Palestinians indigenous to the city of Tulkarem, Palestine. She was a founding member of the Palestinian Youth Movement's DC, Maryland, and Virginia DMV chapter. Dana has spent most of her adult career as an educator in Detroit and Baltimore schools, and now works for a fiscal agency that sponsors over 100 predominantly Black-led and racial justice-driven projects across Baltimore City. She continues to advocate for practices that reduce harm to BAP-PC communities operating within the nonprofit industrial complex. And if you'd like to join Dana's room, add 4 at the beginning of your Zoom room name. Dartricia Rollins is a bookseller, cultural worker, organizer, and memory worker. She serves on the board of directors at Access Reproductive Care Southeast, a member of the Black Alliance for Peace and the Party for Socialism and Liberation. Dartricia is also a graduate student at the University of Alabama, SLIS 24. Her latest project is Georgia Dusk, a Southern Liberation oral history project connecting to the intersections of Black movement and cultural work in Atlanta, Georgia, across generations. And if you would like to join Dartricia's breakout room, add 5 to the beginning of your Zoom room name. So with that, we will kick it off to Coco. And if you would like to join Coco's room following this breakout session, add 1 at the beginning of your name. But Coco, please share. And thank you for joining us this evening.
All right, just give me 1 second. All right. So free the land and free them all, as always, we should say. Peace and revolutionary greetings to all that could make it tonight. I just wanted to get a quick disclaimer. I'm a mother, so please forgive me for any potential interruptions. I do have a 5-year-old, and I'm gonna do my best to continue through it. And also my apologies, I didn't provide a background visual presentation, so just bear with me. So tonight I'll be discussing the struggle of the internal domestic colony. From the shores of the African continent to the shores of a newly conquered territory, Africans were forced into chattel slavery. Thus, a new African nation was formed. Both socially and politically, the new African nation became the commodified property of European savage settlers who settled on stolen land via genocide. The new African, from the Maroon to the Gullah Geechee, always in resistance, are the earliest exploited Africans who forcefully labored the economic foundation of this European settler capitalist state. The hegemony and expansion of the colonial projects of the United States of America that we experience today is, no matter what part of the globe we were born on, responsible for the genocide and destruction of our people today. From Georgia to Ghana, Africans are, as Nkrumah would state, subject to neo-colonial pressures, which however much we resist, we cannot entirely escape, struggle as we may. The difference in reality is between those nations that accept neo-colonialism as a policy and those who do not. Therefore, we must, as Africans in resistance, work toward the ends of the colonialists, as Fanon would fiercely proclaim. All Africans are subjected to the classification of last-class citizenship worldwide. We are, together, a diaspora of African nations, forced under the suppression of authentic political representation and self-sufficiency. We are, together, a diaspora forced into the compromising neo-colonial relationship in which we are forced continuously to be exploited for our genius, creativity, strength, labor power, and resilient determination to be free. However this might sound, we, New Africans, are a nation on this continent and beyond that is bound by our history in chains, but also our history in resistance to those chains. As Mama Assata Shakur would remind us, it is our duty to fight and it is our duty to win. Where we are today, the New African nation, within this colony, a nation within a nation without any political power, aside from a crumbling misleadership class of Black politicians and scammers alike. The New African nation was emancipated under the guise of freedom from private plantation ownership. However, as captives of imperialism and conquest, and yet again, post-Civil War, the New African nation was misled into accepting what the union of class enemies presented, so-called citizenship. Only problem is, we went from chattel slavery to wage slavery. The New African nation was yet again a tool for continuous capitalist expansion and exploitation. To understand the history of the New African nation, the captive colonial, is to understand the present class war being waged today. To understand our situation is needing for us to critically disrupt the misleadership of the neoliberal few, who are only found standing in front of a struggle for a photo op and paycheck, yet behind closed doors present solutions that further push New Africans into a lose-lose situation, where we are maximally exploited, politically unrepresented, and mentally and spiritually bankrupted. To quote El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz, also known as Malcolm X, power never takes a step back, only in the face of more power. New Africans, again, no matter which landmass we've been exploited from, are policed, surveilled, and incarcerated at unsustainable rates. We are the captive class, which has laws made just for us in case we deviate from the special designation of last class citizenship. Because when we deviate, we become further exploited as a new class of criminalized captives, warehoused much like we were warehoused off the shores of Africa. Mumia Abu Jamal expertly explains, a nation, like an individual, is the sum total of its psychological, genetic, historic, social, spiritual, economic, and political influences. And a few can arrive that any other people have been exposed to as many or as destructive negative life influences as that of Africans in America. The New African nation today is experiencing a new militarized form of policing and fascism to destroy our political movements for social change. thus furthering its attempts to maintain its power over this ever-expanding empire. To call to free our political prisoners and prisoners of war is a call for us to recognize the history of a nation in captivity under laws and ruthless counterinsurgent programs such as COINTELPRO. To all new Africans of the diaspora, I ask, as others have also asked, why are we building someone else's nation? Are we not capable of self-determination? To understand the internal colony and how we've been misled is to understand that we as a nation have been conditioned to accept our captors and their appointed misleadership class in order to be free. When in reality, we need to reclaim our people and assume political power over our genius, creativity, strength, and labor power. As I'm positive, we are determined to be free. I will end here. As we'll see today, new Africans are in a unique situation. The desire to break free from hundreds of years of exploitation and degradation of our people should propel us forward. That of a new form, forward toward a new form of resistance, an organized mass of people ready to stand firm and defend the new African nation beyond contradiction. Asante Sana, and I yield.
Thank you so much, Comrade. And Comrade Coco shares so much on the analysis of Africans from Georgia to Ghana, that we are subjected to a colonial situation, and it is our responsibility to organize to overthrow that colonial situation. So free the land. Thank you, Comrade. If you would like to join Coco's breakout room that's coming up, please add the number 1 to your Zoom room name. And next up, we have Arlene Eisen, an incredible, amazing comrade who's been dedicated to anti-colonial struggle for decades. Arlene will discuss Operation Ghetto Storm 10 years later. Comrade Arlene, please take it away.
Greetings. I'm really honored to be here. I can't think of a better way I might have spent International Women's Day yesterday than preparing this talk. If you haven't already read Operation Ghetto Storm, I urge you to give it a try. A lot of us skim through 10-year-old reports as obsolete, but unfortunately, it couldn't be more current. Police, security guards, and vigilantes are the frontline troops in the permanent, currently lopsided war against Black people, waged by the settler colonial state. In 2012, that war resulted in the killing of a Black person every 28 hours. Today, the numbers are worse. And today, after another 10 years of US imperialist perpetual wars and militarization around the world, institutions and policies of white supremacy, capitalist pillage, and patriarchy have strengthened their grip not only on the state, but on civil society, the media, and among the masses of white people. During the legal proceedings against Giuliani's infamous stop and frisk policy, recordings of police officials were played. One high-level officer admitted, quote, "We aim to instill fear every time they leave home." That is, thanks to the institutional mission of the police, which is the same as occupying armies worldwide, and in the spirit of the settler colonial army in Palestine, another Brooklyn cop asserted, if you get too big a crowd there, you know, they're going to get out of control and they're going to think they own the block. We own the block. They might live there, but we own it. We own the streets here. And in much the same way, we see the collaboration and collusion between the Israeli Defense Forces and armed settlers to carry out the pogrom in Hawara and the daily genocidal practices against the Palestinians. In the US, we see collaboration and overlap among police, white supremacist vigilantes, private security companies, and too many veterans of the US Armed Forces. For this reason, in our report, we counted killings by vigilantes and security guards as well as police. We refuse to rely on police accounts in analyzing data or use categories that reflect the dominant narrative that demonizes and criminalizes the entire Black population and glorifies the heroism of police who supposedly risk their lives daily to, quote, serve in Black communities. Police reports are notorious for their lies and omission, so we scoured the internet to follow up on every case we found. There's a chart, which if I had had my slides, I could have showed you. It's in the report, that talks about the absence of justification for any use of lethal force by international human rights standards. In all but 13%, in other words, 87% were not justified in any way, shape, or form. But 13% of the killings might come under the heading of required lethal force. Those were cases in which the police actively interrupted an ongoing shooting where other people had already died. I also need to emphasize another finding. 44% of the Black people who were executed were not armed, no weapon at all. Another 27 were alleged to have a weapon, but it was never demonstrated that they did. Police are notorious for planting weapons or claiming a cell phone, wallet is a gun. Even so, 20% of the 313 Black people who police killed definitely did possess guns. Another 23 had knives or cutting tools. 20%. I hope in the breakout sessions we have more time to discuss the pitfalls of the various movements and uprisings that focus nearly exclusively on unarmed victims. Their deaths spark the protests. They are the worthy victims. Trayvon Martin was carrying Skittles. Michael Brown's middle name might have been unarmed. Breonna Taylor was killed in her bed. It's understandable that the injustice of these murders triggers outrage, but by ignoring or even condoning the deaths of armed or allegedly armed Black people, the movement de facto accepts the white supremacist narrative that the state's war on Black people is justified by the criminality and threat Black people pose to society. Such acceptance plays directly into the hands of the media, laws, courts that guarantee impunity to killer cops and vigilantes and continued support for the intensification of the war on Black people. Demands for justice hinge on the innocence of the dead. This thinking ignores the fact that it's legal everywhere to carry a gun in the United States. Recent Supreme Courts have even lifted permitting requirements. Carrying a gun is not a crime if you're white, let alone a capital offense. And in the report, there's a chart comparing those rates of killings. And today, for several years, especially given the egregious denial and impunity surrounding these killings, for a minute, it might have been easy to conclude that the exposure of the problem of the Black Lives by the Black Lives Movement or the George Floyd uprisings had prevented the problem from getting worse. That's not true, it is worse. both quantitatively and qualitatively. Here are a few indicators of the worsening impunity. The majority of killings are still not officially reported. They're hidden by design. The building block of police impunity is police refusal to officially report most of their killings and to deny, lie, and obscure the truth in the reports they do make. There is no, to date, official standardized database. An authoritative study by the public health journal, The Lancet, found that between 1980 and 2018, the US National Statistics System underreported fatal police perpetrated violence by 56%, 56%. In other words, between 1980 and 2018, at least 17,000 deaths went unreported, even after the post-Ferguson upheavals pushed Obama to decree toothless policies to enforce police compliance with reporting procedures. More recently, the Washington Post, December 6, 2022, ran a very good in-depth article entitled, "As Fatal Shootings Increase, More Go Unreported." I have a slide that showed that none of the 11 shootings that were that the Washington Post found in Boston in 2015 were reported, despite the fact that they received a $2.2 million grant to do the reporting from the federal government. Virtually none of the states report all of their killings. California reported 51%, Minnesota 38, Michigan 34, Illinois 14, that's where Chicago is, Ohio 13, Mississippi only reported 5% and Florida none. Of the 18,000 police departments who've been asked to report, only 290 have submitted complete reports. And we still don't know the magnitude of the problem. My educated guess is that on average, state-sponsored and sanctioned killers are responsible for the death of a Black person at least every 24 hours, and probably more. If brown people are included in the count, especially those trying to cross the border, it's likely that 2 people are dying each day in the US empire's war to maintain white supremacy within its borders. There's a new book out by a liberal law professor called Shielded: How the Police Became Untouchable. The author there details all the legal precedents, current rulings and practices, and how they've only strengthened state support for police who kill with impunity. So despite the high profile conviction of Derek Chauvin in the George Floyd case, in the last 10 years, an increase in police convictions is in the single digits and has no statistical significance.
Arlene, we have 2 minutes, 2 minutes.
Thank you. Another important fact is that 70% of police who were terminated for use of excessive force are reinstated, overturned, returned to duty. More money, more technology, more power for the various military tools for full spectrum dominance, from Cop City in Atlanta to San Francisco, where the police just got a 10% raise, perhaps the only job in the country where anyone with a high school equivalency and a driver's license can earn $108,000 base pay when they start. Did I say 108,000? Political and social support for white supremacy and patriarchy After at least a century of imperial wars, the hegemonic culture of US settler colonialism is not only white supremacist, it's also macho, predatory, materialistic, and individualistic. Whether we focus on the capitulation of the government's public health infrastructure to COVID deniers and those who equate freedom with pathological selfishness that refuses to consider the health needs of others, or the virulent misogyny inherent in laws that force women to breed in growing numbers of states, or the fascist laws criminalizing Black, brown, and queer teachings in public libraries and schools, or the velvet gloves with which white supremacist militias are treated, this culture reflects and reinforces the consolidation of the national security state.
Hey, comrade, you have just some final thoughts before?
That's it.
Okay.
We can talk more in the breakout session.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Yes, so much analysis that's here. And if you would like to expand on this discussion with Arlene Eisen, please add number 2 at the beginning of your Zoom name. It's very clear that there's so much to get through as far as just the connections of the domestic colony and how African and Black people are killed at least every 28 hours. So please, if you want to join her room, add the number 2 to your Zoom room name.
It's unclear whether it's 2 or 3.
It's 2.
Okay.
2, yes. Okay, so next up, we have Tongo, which he will share his analysis on white supremacist infiltration of police and military. And if you would like to join Tongo's room, you would add number 3. So to your Zoom room name. Tongo, please take it away.
Right on. What's happening, everybody? Whiteness, more than a privilege, is a deputization. Creating masses drafted for the sake of perpetually suppressing Black people and Black revolt, seeing Black people as a permanent enemy and an absolute social contradiction. Fanon wrote, "The colonial world is a world cut in two. The dividing line, the frontiers are shown by barracks and police stations. In the colonies, it is the policeman and the soldier who are the official instituted go-betweens, the spokesman of the settler and his rule of oppression." So what of these official badge bearers, the tip of the ruling class spear? In 2020 featured the highest recorded number of white supremacist organizations in US history with 838. 2019 was their most violent year since the Oklahoma bombing in 1995. After the January 6th white uprising, they vetted National Guard troops who were to be present at Biden's inauguration, and dozens were removed for white supremacist beliefs. In the prosecution of January 6th rioters, 15%, including the leader of the Oath Keepers, a violent white supremacist militia organization that boasts tens of thousands of members, 15% had ties to military and law enforcement. And in fact, the Oath Keeper name itself is a recruitment tool for military and law enforcement to join a cause, implying that the US government would have you break your commitment to the country. Hate crimes mirror policing and imprisonment trends in data collected by the feds themselves, collected since 1995. It showed that 66% of hate crimes were perpetuated against Black people. What we have to come to terms with is that we are not just dealing with a white supremacist movement that is recruiting police and soldiers as well as sending their members into law enforcement and military forces, but we are dealing with a white supremacist movement, a neo-Confederate tendency that has grown beyond its past weaknesses by the successful integration of police and military into their groups for decades. Surges in overt mobilization of white supremacy historically have been beholden to the waxing and waning of socioeconomic conditions for white people and state support and occasionally state chastisement of their white supremacist organizations. But now, with the stabilization that military personnel and police officers have provided these groups after decades of integration, they can get away with a bolder and more brazen and more normalized residency in the mass imagination, residency in the mass civic participation, along with improved structures that these better militarized groups are provided by police and soldier participation. White supremacist movements have become electrified with successful reorganization of cultural presentation. They have made themselves 100 times more palatable, providing gateway praxis through organizations like the Proud Boys or the Tiki Torch guys who actually keep the traditional white supremacist aesthetics to a minimum, which along with great cover for mass recruitment, give cooperating law enforcement an easier justification for not interfering with them. They've also adopted tactics from the left in anchoring a lot of their efforts in a caricature of protest movement. They even practice mutual aid. They now have a dozen flavors for you to choose from, but all roads still lead to a white ethno-state born of a mass murder of non-white people. This is what they are all scaffolding, and we would be foolish to underestimate their sharing of intelligence gathered by their police officers and soldiers and their cooperation in operations of violence that achieved global unity a long time ago. They have also been thriving off of local, state, and federal cooperation via non-prosecution of both white supremacist groups and the police officers who call themselves members. In 2019, the Justice Department charged a New Jersey police chief with a hate crime for assaulting a Black teenager during a trespassing arrest after several of his deputies recorded his numerous racist rants. This was the first time in 10 years that the federal prosecutor had charged an on-duty officer with a hate crime. In fact, federal prosecutors declined to prosecute 96% of FBI civil rights investigations involving police misconduct from 1995 to 2015, turning down more than 12,700 complaints. Those of us who would join in revolutionary struggle are especially vulnerable. The feds themselves have reported that white supremacist groups have been targeting organizers for murder and have successfully murdered some of us already. And white supremacist group members who are police can be seen everywhere in the modern political contest for public space. From 2016 to 2019, the Portland Police Bureau was accused of being inappropriately sympathetic to far-right protesters. DHS officers were captured on video soliciting the assistance of militia members to arrest anti-racist protesters, and a publication called the Willamette Week published an article exposing friendly text messages between a Portland Police Bureau lieutenant and an out-of-state leader of a far-right group who came to town to rally. And these text messages included advice on how one member with an active warrant could avoid arrest and details about movements of opposing groups. Now, the Portland Police Bureau later claimed that the lieutenant was some kind of double agent, but we have a list that goes on, including officers showing up to demonstrations wearing their oath keepers and 3%er patches on their bulletproof vests and face coverings, patterns of arrest or non-arrest when it comes to these groups in the street, and overt collaboration. Now, while some evolution of the neo-Confederate tendency as revealed by police and military participation is new, we know that the contradiction between oppressor and oppressed is the same. And we know that these troops are what emerges from a mass of white people and non-white people, resting in peace, Tyree Nichols, who have accepted and internalized this peculiar psyche born of normalizing genocide. What then is to be done What do we do in the face of heightening and ever consolidating violence? We have to go to the people without lies and tales of easy victories and let them know through our praxis the true nature of the society and the ideological and cultural clarity that true resistance begins with. So it's you know, in conclusion, it's ugly, but time is not up, and there's plenty of work to be done. No compromise, no retreat.
Yes, no compromise, no retreat. Thank you, comrade. And Tongo shares many of the ways of how mass coordination across white supremacists and policing are dependent on each other for continuing this settler colonial project. So thank you for that. If you would like to join Tongo's room, please add 3 at the beginning of the Zoom room name. So next we have Dana. Dana will share her analysis with regard to deadly exchange, and we'll also have a presentation. So Dana, please proceed.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you all for being here today. Thank you, BAP, for having me. I am here from Baltimore, Maryland. First and foremost, I want to acknowledge that Baltimore is the ancestral land of the Piscataway and Susquehannock tribes. So let's go ahead and jump into the deadly exchange. What is the deadly exchange? The deadly exchange refers to a wide number of programs that U.S. law enforcement officials, from police chiefs, CIA, DHS, FBI, all partake in which they travel to occupied Palestine and receive training from the Israeli occupation forces around so-called best practices to surveil, racially profile, and suppress any dissent by civilians. Now, before I go into too much detail on the deadly exchange, I think it's really important that when we're having these conversations, our starting point addresses the fundamental nature of both the US and Israel, particularly as settler colonial projects, right? And what that means is both projects were founded upon and have a clear aim to create a new nation of people to exist on a land by replacing the indigenous people of that land. So settler colonialism requires the complete erasure and genocide of the indigenous population. I want to share a quick quote on settler colonialism that I think helps frame it really well. While colonialism focuses on exploiting resources and colonized populations, settler colonials come to stay and consider the colonized territory their own. Patrick Wolf understands settler colonialism in terms of a structured genocide, illustrating concrete relations between spatial removal, mass killings, and biocultural association. What we see here in this picture just happened last week, where Zionist settlers in Palestine, with the support of the occupation forces, burned down a Palestinian village. And so to further prove that settler colonialism relies on this genocide, it rests on the logic of elimination. The logic of elimination constitutes settler colonialism as an ongoing structure of power that systematically erases indigenous peoples from the land and replaces them with settlers. Another framework that's important to address is racism. And I'm not going to talk too much about the history of racism as it pertains to the origins of US police, just because those before me have spoken so eloquently about this. But I do think it's important to understand the relationship between racism and settler colonialism, right? So when we understand the origin of US police as slave patrols, because enslaved Africans were considered property that white settlers owned, and we understand that the purpose of owning slaves was to exploit their labor on stolen land and to continue to accumulate land, right? Like through the westward expansion. then we can understand that racism, racial capitalism, settler colonialism, and imperialism cannot be divorced from one another. And when we understand that these systemic issues cannot be divorced from one another and that they are linked, then we understand that the freedom of Black people and the freedom of Indigenous people, Palestinians included, is inherently linked. And so our work has to come together in our liberation movements. And the last thing I wanted to touch on briefly is just US imperialism as it relates to Palestine, right? It's important to recognize that this is a two-way relationship. It's not just the Israeli occupation forces or the state of Israel that supports violence against Black people here in the US, but also the US in many ways upholds violence against Palestinians and the erasure of the Palestinian people. A couple of examples, just to name a couple out of the many ways that the US does this. Is somebody, I feel like, moderators can help mute. Thank you. Some examples: the U.S. has given Israel over $30 billion over the past decade. So the U.S. budget annually includes $3.8 billion to Israel. A lot of US institutions and states have either criminalized or punished people who practice boycotting Israel, which is against our First Amendment right to boycott. And last but not least, I want to name that a lot of these settlers who go to Palestine, who steal Palestinian land and participate in this genocide, are American Zionists. They are people who come straight from the US. So it's important to recognize that both the US and Israel are fundamentally violent settler colonial states. The US has always been a violent state long before its trainings from Israel. It certainly doesn't need another state to teach it how to be violent. And this linking of our liberation struggles really helps frame this conversation on the deadly exchange. So let's go ahead and jump into the actual deadly exchange. One of the ways that the US and Israel collaborate is around surveillance. Israel is regarded as a global leader in surveillance technology. It surveils Palestinians in just about every way possible. The state of Israel has 522 forms of restrictions on physical movement. There are checkpoints at entrances and exits of every Palestinian village. There are barriers. Palestinians are forced to carry permits with them at all times that show who they are, where they're going, where they're allowed to go. In addition to physical surveillance, there's also, in addition to violation of movement, we also have technological surveillance. The state of Israel is a global leader in technology, from X-rays to X-ray machines to radars, sensors, remote controlled cameras, drones, wiretapping, online surveillance, right? Like it surveils Palestinian movement in every single way possible and Palestinian activity in every way. It's also important to name that the state of Israel contracts with not only US institutions, but institutions and governments around the world to surveil Palestinians globally, in diaspora, in exile, and not just Palestinians in Palestine. So here is a super quick diagram that I just wanted to flash on US surveillance. These are the institutions in the US that work together and collaborate and capitalize off of one another to further surveil Black and Brown and Indigenous communities here in the US. We understand the US has always been a surveillance state, from COINTELPRO to the quote unquote war on terror. Police have repeatedly and routinely surveilled and obstructed activities that are protected under the First Amendment. So here are some examples, very tangible examples of relationships between US police departments and the state of Israel, particularly around surveillance technology. I want to bring your attention first and foremost to City Watch, just because I'm located here in Baltimore. This is a huge program in Baltimore where private citizens are strongly encouraged to link their private cameras to the Baltimore Police Department. It is operated by NICE Systems, which is an Israeli software that also helps surveilling the US.
Dana, real quick, we're only seeing the first slide. Have you been progressing
Oh,
through?
no! Really?
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah. Okay. Now we see them changing. Okay.
It was because I minimized it. Okay. This was
Okay.
the first slide. This was the second slide.
Oh, wow.
There
Okay.
you
Okay.
go. Sorry, it was all pretty and stuff. Anyway, Israeli surveillance. This was the diagram on the U.S. institutions that work together in order to surveil Americans. And then this is where I was finally around specific programs where the U.S. and Israel have a relationship and ties, and U.S. implements Israeli technology. So I spoke about the Baltimore one. We also have in Atlanta, the police chief, shortly after visiting Israel, implemented a surveillance system modeled after the surveillance in Jerusalem, Palestine, and Israel. Plenty of examples around this. The other piece is use of force. It's hard to talk about use of force, particularly in Israel and in occupied Palestine, because Israel does not shy away from use of force. In fact, a lot of weapons manufacturers in the U.S. will export their weapons to Israel, whether they are chemical weapons, physical weapons, whatever they are, to test them on Palestinians. So you have mass like towns, villages, cities, all of Palestine, the West Bank, Gaza, that are literally used as laboratories for Israel to practice using US-made weapons.
2 minutes, Dana.
Thank you. Some of this includes riot gear, armored vehicles, tear gas, stun grenades, rubber bullet, semi-automatic rifles. And I just want to bring your attention really quickly to this quote by Maine State Police Chief Robert Williams, who says after he went to Israel, he was impressed with Israeli law enforcement expertise and their vast amount of experience with identifying potential threats and neutralizing them. Of course, we know that potential threat in Palestine and occupied Palestine by the Israeli occupation forces means Palestinian, and we know that potential threat here means Black and communities, Indigenous communities, and people of color. So why does it matter? Why do we need to learn about the deadly exchange? A couple of reasons. One, it expands our understanding of the relationship between violent settler states, right? When we understand how our oppressors work together, we understand why our solidarity is important and why it is powerful. Another more immediate and material impact of understanding this is to join campaigns to demilitarize US police. US police are going to continue to be violent no matter what, but there have been plenty of successful campaigns through the Deadly Exchange campaign that have made it illegal for police departments to maintain these contracts with the state of Israel. And last but not least, anti-normalization of the Zionist state. When we recognize the Zionist state as inherently violent and contributing to violence against Palestinians and around the world, then we are able to reject the state of Israel and Zionism by all means, whether it is simply visiting the state of Israel, participating in any programs that are Zionist programs, and rejecting the entire Zionist project. Finally, I have up on the screen a couple of resources, some really amazing organizations. To read up more about this, visit thedeadlyexchange.org. I definitely want to uplift the Palestinian youth movement for their amazing grassroots work. I have a quote on here by Fatima Bernawi, a militant Palestinian revolutionary fighter, that says, "Palestinians do not know the word impossible." And I say that to say that our collaboration, Black people and Palestinians, in our freedom for liberation, in the way that Palestinians showed up during the Ferguson uprisings to help people understand, to help Black people and all protesters really understand how to deal with tear gas, was a beautiful moment of solidarity. Our solidarity is important. There is hope. And I just hope we continue to be grounded in liberation of all of these lands through anti-colonial struggles. Thank you so much for having me.
Dana, thank you so much for that thorough analysis. Yeah, there's just so much here and how we connect these struggles from Memphis to Palestine. So thank you, comrade. And as we know, as we continue to struggle against settler colonialism, we know that from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. If you would like to join Dana Alserjani Abu-Chinab's room, please add the number 4 at the beginning of your room name. And now we will move on to Dartricia Rollins. And Dartricia will discuss the struggle against Cop City.
Thank you. Hey y'all, I'm calling in from Atlanta, Georgia, and Cop City. So in September 2021, the Atlanta City Council passed legislation to destroy hundreds of acres of forest land in Atlanta and replace it with a massive police training facility. Although the plans for Cop City were in the works before 2020, they were accelerated after historic uprisings across the country, where we saw the masses in the streets calling for defund and abolish the police. But instead of defunding the police budgets have steadily increased with support at the city, state, and federal levels. And so-called nonprofit foundations are subsidizing them even more. Specifically, the Atlanta Police Foundation, one of the largest, most well-resourced, and most sophisticated police foundations in the country. Directly from their website, quote, since 2003, APF has been providing vital strategic support to the mayor, the chief of police, and the Atlanta Police Department on the forefront of public safety's future direction. In 2015, Atlanta was named a model city by President Obama's task force for 21st century policing, one of only 15 jurisdictions to be given that status out of 18,000 reviewed, end quote. Which if you're familiar with the late Glenn Ford, you know that Obama ain't never been a friend of ours. The Atlanta Police Foundation is a private organization that funnels corporate money into policing, protecting corporate interests, and enabling state-sanctioned violence against Black communities and communities of color. APF board members include representatives from UPS, Wells Fargo, Home Depot, JP Morgan, Delta, Georgia Power, Chick-fil-A, Amazon, and other prominent firms. It supports various police programs with the intent to repress and surveil Black communities, including building housing for the police in a historic Black neighborhood that is being rapidly gentrified, initiatives such as Operation Shield, which allows police officers to view footage captured by the foundation's privately owned cameras, increasing the access of private and public cameras from 100 to nearly 12,000 in 10 years. All of this is important because the current project of Cop City is being spearheaded by the Atlanta Police Foundation, with the city of Atlanta leasing 381 acres of Weelaunee Forest to APF for a militarized police training facility. At the price of $90 million, Cop City includes a mock city to practice urban warfare, including tear gas and explosives testing, dozens of shooting ranges, and a Black Hawk helicopter landing pad. The systems of policing in the United States trains officers in violence, not safety. This police militarization facility embodies the nature of policing in the United States, as it would train police in military-grade weaponry and crowd control techniques. The crowd control techniques that police have used in social movements have been excessively violent, as demonstrated in the police response to the 2020 protests against the murder of George Floyd. Here in Atlanta, we saw the kind of excessive force that police are capable of, such as shooting people with rubber bullets, tasing two innocent college students in their cars, and violently tear gassing and assaulting peaceful protesters. This facility will make police violence worse and bolster the structural issues of racist policing. Supported by the Atlanta Committee for Progress, which is composed of over 40 corporate elites, including the CEOs of Coca-Cola, Home Depot, Cox, and the presidents of HBCUs, Spelman, Clark, and Morehouse colleges. It aims to further the surveillance of the population by stifling dissent and rapidly increasing gentrification of the city, displacing the Black and poor working class in a city dubbed as the Black Mecca. Even after 200 hours of public comments from the community, largely against the construction of this unnecessary training center, the Police Foundation, in collaboration with Black misleaders such as Mayor Andre Dickens and a 50% Black City Council, still decided to continue on, even though it is overwhelmingly unpopular. Projects like Operation Shield have already made Atlanta the most surveilled city in the world. Cop City will be the latest form of militarized repression deployed to control and contain Black and brown, poor, and working class populations if constructed. Much like the Gilly Project, police exchange between Israeli police and Israeli military in Georgia, Cop City in Atlanta has deadly implications not only for the people in the city of Atlanta or even the state of Georgia, is a national and international threat, as it will become the hub for police from all over to use as its facilities for training and controlling people enacting violence. Ecologically and socially, Cop City is dangerous and bolsters the prison industrial complex. This construction will destroy essential forests, pollute our watershed, and train officers in dangerous militarization tactics. Proponents of increasing military and police budgets also rally behind gentrification, deforestation, further extraction and use of fossil fuels, as well as other drivers of the racialized climate crisis. The label may have changed from the war on crime to the war on drugs, to the war on terror, to the war on domestic terror, as demonstrated by the recent domestic terrorism charges against nonviolent activists and protesters. But the intent of the war against our people remains the same throughout these iterations: hyper-policing, incarceration, surveillance, infiltration, direct military assaults, and extrajudicial murders have long characterized the relationship between US intelligence and law enforcement agencies and the Black and brown colonized and working classes of the United States. The site of the old Atlanta prison farm, which has served as a plantation and detention center, will continue to perpetuate the historic legacy of incarceration and white supremacy after promising to leave it as a forested area to the surrounding community. Tonight, Community Movement Builders is calling all organizations, organizers, and community members to a national day of action against police violence to demand justice for the police murder of Tyree Nichols in Memphis, Stop Cop City, forest offender Torquita, and all others lost and impacted by police violence and terror. Since the first invasion of the forest by police last year, forest offenders have been held and charged with domestic terrorism. And community members who gathered for a music festival to say no to Cop City last Sunday were brutalized and arrested. And as of today, 22 of those 23 arrested at the concert have been denied bail and charged with domestic terrorism. These police forces are not committed to protecting and serving the interests of our communities, but to powerful oppressive forces outside of our communities. While they use language like outside agitators to divide the working class, their class interest and collaboration has never been stronger. Corporations and petty bourgeois Africans rely on the police to protect their interests, and it is on us to get organized. What we need is an end to police occupation of colonized Black and brown communities. The struggle against Cop City has been multifaceted, with collaboration from environmentalists and abolitionists and everyone in between. BAP member organization, Community Movement Builders, has been at the forefront of efforts to defeat Cop City. CMB's analysis suggests the Cop City, placed in the heart of a still majority Black city, is an insidious reminder of both the collaborative nature of the Black misleadership that serves the white capitalist minority, and the fact that this minority is preparing for the massive use of physical repressive power to maintain control of its internal colonies. The demand is to stop Cop City now. No compromise, no retreat.
Thank you. I hope that in the breakout rooms, I hope the discussions were generative. I hope they were helpful to expand your analysis. So for announcements, just to wrap things up, we have a March 18th action in DC. I've shared a link as far as our statement with regard to the National Day of Action Against Police Terror, and visit the Black Alliance for Peace events page for other upcoming events as part of the National Day of Action, and so that we can all collectively organize. So March 18th, DC action, please check that out. And again, you'll find that link at the bottom of the link in the statement, which I shared. And thank you lastly to the panelists. Thank you so much. Thank you for your analysis. Thank you for your ongoing work. And we will continue to connect these struggles and to build a better world. So thank you, comrades. No compromise, no retreat.